baby girl lay in a cardboard box, too cold to cry and too small to understand why she'd been left behind. Then a quiet millionaire heard one faint sound in the dark, and the choice he made next would change both their lives forever. Before today's story begins, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from? I think it's pretty amazing that people who may never meet can still share the same story together. Thanks for spending part of your day here. Ethan Whitmore left the office at 10:30, which qualified as an early night. Whitmore Capital cleared out around 6, but the building on East 9th Street had a quality of quiet after hours that made working easier, or made going back to the condo easier to put off. He'd been using one excuse or the other for years without much interest in figuring out which. He was 34. His firm managed just over $200 million in commercial real estate, and he ran all of it with a precision the people around him described, when they were being tactful, as exacting. His condo in the warehouse district was the kind of place architects put on their websites: exposed brick, clean sightlines, nothing out of its spot. He kept it exactly that way. He took the stairs and went out the side exit, collar up against the October cold. The street at that hour was stripped down to its essentials: a delivery truck at a red light, 2 nurses crossing half a block down, the orange smear of a gas station sign lying flat on the wet pavement. He cut behind a row of shuttered storefronts near the loading dock. He did most nights. It was faster. He was still chewing on a call he'd handled badly that afternoon when he heard it. He figured it for a cat, or ventilation somewhere underground. Then it came again, thin and uneven, too deliberate for wind, too exhausted for anything that still had Drinkstrick to spend on it. He stopped. The service alley between 2 brick buildings was barely wide enough for a man and a wheeled bin. The cardboard box was pushed against the far wall, half blocked from the wind by a recycling container. A pale floral blanket, small roses washed out pink, the kind that comes 4 to a pack at a drugstore, lay across the top. He crouched down, pulled back the edge, and found a baby girl, 4 months old, maybe a little less. She was wrapped in the blanket and a dish towel someone had folded under her feet. Her lips were dry. Her eyes tracked him briefly, then fell closed. She was producing a sound that her body was very nearly out of resources to make. He didn't pick her up. He called 911. Then he shrugged out of his overcoat, held it above the box like a windbreak. One knee on the cold pavement, the other braced against the recycling bin, and answered the dispatcher's questions without looking away from her. When he finally slid a hand under the blanket to check her breathing, she grabbed 2 of his fingers. The grip was reflexive. Babies do that. But there was something in its weight, the specific pull of that small hand closing around his in the dark, that he didn't move away from. He stayed until the sirens came into the alley. At County General, the ER team worked fast. She was dehydrated and cold, but not beyond what fluids and warmth could fix. A nurse found a small hospital bracelet tucked inside the blanket, folded into a clear plastic sleeve to keep it dry. She read it aloud for intake: Sophia Clark, 4 months. Somebody had made sure she still had a name in the system before letting go of her. A paramedic told Ethan he was free to leave whenever he was ready. He found the waiting area and took a plastic chair near the wall. The room had a TV mounted in the corner, volume off, cycling through the 11 o'clock news. His lower back was complaining about the pavement. Every time he thought about standing up and walking out, he looked at the swinging doors and sat there a little longer. A CPS caseworker arrived just before 2, Donna Ruiz. Early 40s, professional coat, the kind of settled calm that comes from delivering hard news long enough to carry it without letting it show. She explained the situation plainly. Emergency infant placement was backed up. No foster bed available before morning. What does that mean for tonight? Ethan asked. It means we don't have an answer yet. He told her he'd take the baby for the night. He heard himself say it clearly, which surprised him. Dana wrote things down, explained what supervised placement required, and went through what she'd need from him before morning. He signed what she put in front of him. He called Clara Parker from the parking lot. Clara was 63, had worked for him for 11 years, went to church on Sundays, and had no patience for men who turned their discomfort into other people's problems. Officially, she was his house manager. In practice, she was the only person who knew where the spare keys were, which neighbors could be trusted, and when Ethan was pretending he did not need help. She'd outlasted two of his business partners and never once volunteered her opinion about either. "I'm bringing an infant home," he said. A pause. "How old? 4 months. I'll heat a bottle. Don't speed." When he arrived, Clara was already at the counter in her housecoat and reading glasses, a bottle warming in a bowl of water by the sink. She took Sophia from him without ceremony, checked the baby's coloring against the kitchen light, tested the milk on her wrist, sat down in the chair near the window, and started feeding her. No commentary. Just the work. Ethan stood in the doorway with his coat over one arm and watched. The kitchen looked the same as it always did. Yellow light above the stove, copper pot rack, 2 bottles of wine on the counter that had been sitting there since September. But there was a sound in the room now, the soft, steady pull and pause of a baby being fed. The silence this house usually held felt, for the first time, like something he could put a shape to. Like a kind of quiet that collects in places that have gone too long without being needed. He made coffee and left it on the counter. By 4, Sophia was asleep in the downstairs guest room, the floral blanket tucked around her, his overcoat folded over the back of the chair. Clara had gone to bed. The house settled into a quiet that was different from the one before, though Ethan couldn't have said exactly how. He told himself it was one night. The system would catch up. By tomorrow she'd be placed properly, and his life would return to its regular shape. His phone lit the counter at 6:47 a.m. Dana. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to call this early." A pause. "Placement is still delayed. Can you keep her one more night?" He was already looking down the hallway toward the guest room door. "Yes," he said. One more night became 3. 3 became a week. Dana called every other day with the same update. Placement was backed up. Foster homes for infants were at capacity. She was working it. Ethan took each call the way he took difficult business calls, level, practical, no extra noise. He told himself he was providing a bridge. The system would close the gap, and his life would return to its regular shape. He said something close to that to Clara one morning. She pulled a notepad across the counter. "Write down the formula brand. We're almost out, and the size 2 diapers," he wrote it down. His house had always been exactly as he wanted it. Ordered, uncluttered, easy to move through without catching on anything. That changed fast. Dana's office sent over the basics, a portable crib, a case of formula, a worn diaper bag with a faded cartoon bear on the front. Clara supplemented from her church's resource closet. By midweek, the downstairs guest room had become something between a nursery and a staging area, and the main hallway held a folded changing pad on the side table next to 3 different diaper sizes he kept getting wrong. He overheated the first bottle. He knew it when Sophia pulled back, ran cool water over it, and got the temperature right on the second try. He didn't say anything about the first one. Clara had seen it from across the kitchen and let it go, which felt worse than a correction would have. The diapers were their own lesson. He had watched Clara demonstrate twice and believed he'd absorbed the relevant mechanics. He had not. Sophia moved constantly and had no investment in cooperating, and the adhesive tabs required a coordination he found genuinely humbling. Clara came in, looked at what he'd produced, made one quiet adjustment, and left without comment. He was grateful for the restraint. Dana arrived Thursday for her first supervision visit. She went through the room setup methodically: crib placement, formula supply, sleep position, feeding schedule, and recorded everything without telegraphing approval or concern. When she finished, she said the crib needed to come away from the window. "Drafts," she said, "and keep the blanket below her arms." "I know about the blanket." She held his gaze for a moment. "Good." She turned the page in her notepad and asked when the next feeding was due. He respected her for not softening it. He'd have been more comfortable if that respect had cost him less. Midweek, Sophia had been fussy and overtired, and nothing was settling her. Ethan picked her up and stood in the living room, trying to answer emails one-handed while Clara warmed the bottle. He was partway through a message about a zoning variance when Sophia went still and heavy against his chest, her fist pressed flat against his collar. He looked down, closed the email without finishing it, and set his phone face down on the end table. He stayed where he was with one hand on her back while the radiator ticked and the room went quiet around them. Clara came in with the bottle, saw the situation, set it on the table, and went back to the kitchen. His senior VP reached him the following morning. Harlan was careful enough to choose his questions deliberately. Tuesday briefing and both the Thursday calls, Harlan said. I covered the recap. Is there anything I should be looping in on? Ethan noticed he hadn't asked what was going on, just whether it needed managing. Harlan had probably already picked up something through the office, and this was his way of offering Ethan the chance to handle it on his own terms. Not right now, I'll be back on track by Monday. Okay, Harlan said and left it there. On the morning Ethan had signed the temporary placement forms at County General, Clara had stood in the corridor outside with a blanket folded over her arm. Across the hall, positioned beside the vending machines with her back to the wall, a young woman stood and watched. She didn't approach and she didn't speak. She was there long enough to get what she came for. The baby was alive. The older woman with the blanket was close to the man. And the man, dressed well, guarded, not the type to linger in hospital hallways without a good reason, had lingered anyway. She tracked them through the lobby and out to the parking entrance, staying back enough to be nobody in particular. Ethan hadn't looked toward her. Clara hadn't seen her at all. In the parking lot, she stood in the October cold and read the decal on Clara's rear windshield hood, a small white dove above the name of a church on Lorraine Avenue. She read it twice. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction with her hands in her jacket pockets. She did not know whether the dove meant anything. She did not know whether Clara was family, staff, or only a woman kind enough to bring a blanket. But when a person has run out of doors, even a small white decal can start to look like one. Her name was Emma Clark. Later that week, Ethan brought Sophia to her pediatric follow-up. Heading into the hospital entrance, he passed a woman on a bench near the sliding doors. Paper coffee cup held in both hands, head down, the posture of someone who'd stopped expecting much from the next hour. He moved past her without slowing, went inside, and found the pediatric desk. He settled into the waiting area with Sophia in his lap and the diaper bag open at his feet. She watched their car leave the lot 40 minutes later. He didn't look back. That night, he stood in the guest room doorway for a moment before going upstairs. Sophia was asleep, the floral blanket tucked up to her chest. Less than 2 weeks ago, it had been folded over a cardboard box in a service alley. Now it was just a blanket in a room where a baby slept. He turned off the hall light and went to bed. Across town, Emma sat in a borrowed car with her phone screen lit in the dark. She had a church name and an address on Lorraine Avenue and nothing else to work with. She put the car in drive. By the second week, Ethan had bent his mornings around Sophia's schedule and his evenings around Clara's limits. Both adjustments were starting to show. He found Clara one morning standing at the kitchen counter with her eyes closed, coffee held in both hands. She was 63 and the broken nights were pulling on her in ways she wasn't going to bring up first. This can't keep going, he said. No, she said, it can't. He called Dana that afternoon. She walked him through licensed agency options. The qualified ones were either backed up by 2 weeks or priced past anything defensible. Clara mentioned, as something close to an afterthought, that her church sometimes knew women who were genuinely good with infants. Not on any official list, but real. Ethan said he'd keep it in mind. He didn't know Emma had been inside that church for 2 weeks already. She hadn't come looking for a shortcut. She'd come following the only thread available to her, the dove decal on Clara's windshield and the church name on Lorraine Avenue. From that, she'd built a careful, quiet presence. Sunday services, staying afterward to stack chairs without being asked. Wednesday children's ministry set up. Food pantry hours on Thursdays, standing in line with the same worn patients as everyone else, because she was exactly as tired and short of options as the rest of them. She had learned Clara's rhythms, not to corner her, but to be ready when the right opening came. She hated herself a little for how calculated it felt. But calculation was not the same as deceit, she told herself. Deceit was pretending not to love her child. This was only a mother trying to get close enough to make sure her baby was still breathing. She understood one thing clearly. Desperation without self-control would get her removed from the edges of this situation before she could do anything that mattered. The opening came on a Wednesday afternoon. The fellowship hall was running a mobile food assistant sign-up. Folding tables, clipboards, the steady hum of ordinary effort. Near the door, a toddler had tipped into the kind of crying that gets louder the faster you move toward it. A volunteer was crouching in front of him, trying to reason with a 3-year-old mid-meltdown, which was making things worse. The boy's mother was at the sign-up table with one hand on a form, and her attention split down the middle. Emma moved to a spot off to the child's side, not in front of him, not reaching. She picked up a toy truck he'd knocked to the floor and turned it over in her hands slowly, like she was genuinely studying it. She kept her eyes down. The crying dropped a register. The boy watched her hands. She held the truck out. He took it and turned it over the same slow way she had. She stood, stepped back, and walked over to move a folding chair that needed to go against the wall. Clara had seen all of it. More usefully, she'd seen what Emma didn't do afterward. No glance toward the mother, no small satisfied look around the room. She'd helped and moved on, the way someone does when they're not keeping score. She found Emma near the coat racks before she could leave. "You're good with kids," Clara said. "Thank you. You looking for infant work? I might have something worth asking about." Emma met her eyes. "I'm experienced with newborns. Background check is fine. I can start as soon as needed." Clara looked at her the way she looked at things that deserved a second look, measuring, not suspicious. "Let me make a call," she said. Ethan chose a diner on Lorraine over meeting at the house. He got there first, took the booth with a view of the door, and watched Emma come in. Late 20s, jacket buttoned, the kind of put-together that takes deliberate effort and shows the seams up close. She found him without looking around and sat down across from him with her hands flat on the table. When the server came by, she ordered hot water. Ethan kept his expression level and moved on. The standard questions went quickly. Experienced with infants, immediately available, no issue with supervision requirements. She gave clean answers without overselling them and waited for the next question rather than filling the space. Then she shifted. "Is she on a set 3 of her feeding schedule or more flexible?" He said Sophia had been settling into 3 hours. "When she's overtired, does she rub one foot against the other?" "Some babies do that to wind themselves down." Ethan looked at her. "She does, actually." "And after a mild fever, does she startle more at night?" "Sleep lighter the first day or two." "Yes." He put it down to sharp professional instinct and called Dana from the parking lot. Conditional approval came by morning. Trial period, firm rules, regular check-ins. Emma started the next day. She came in, hung up her jacket, washed her hands at the kitchen sink, and lifted Sophia from the bouncer in one clean motion. Both hands settled against her shoulder before Sophia had time to register the change. No adjustment period, no new person recalibration. Clara, standing in the kitchen doorway, let out a slow breath that had been building for 2 weeks. Ethan watched from across the room and didn't yet put a name to what he was feeling. Late in the afternoon, Emma changed the crib sheet, and the floral blanket slipped off the rail to the floor. She picked it up. For one moment, she went somewhere private. Hands still, eyes on something that wasn't in the room. And then she came back and folded the blanket with deliberate care, smoothing it along the foot of the mattress. She ran her thumb once along the stitched edge. Then she turned back to the crib and got on with it. That evening, Ethan stood in the hallway while Emma settled Sophia for the night. He watched the angle of her hands lowering the baby down, the specific, unhurried way she positioned the blanket, not figuring out where it should go, but putting it where she already knew it went. There was no trial in it, no learning. It was the ease of something done many times before in a room she no longer had access to. He went back to his desk. He sat down, looked at his screen. He couldn't have said what he'd been working on before she walked in that morning. Emma had been in the house 5 days when Ethan started paying attention to things he couldn't quite explain. Sophia cried less, she settled faster. When she was building toward overtired, Emma could read it before the signs were visible. She'd lift her and move toward the window and hum something low and shapeless until the baby's shoulders let go. Ethan watched all of it. He was grateful. He was also developing a low, specific unease he couldn't place. On Tuesday morning, Emma mentioned, before he'd noticed anything himself, that Sophia had been pulling at her left ear since breakfast. The thermometer confirmed a low fever 40 minutes later. He stood in the doorway afterward and thought about it longer than the moment seemed to call for. There were other things. The angle she held the bottle slightly tilted to keep air from collecting in the baby's stomach. The way she lowered Sophia into the crib, straight down, not at an angle which seemed to matter. He told himself it was professional skill. That explanation covered most of it, not quite all. The night it changed was a Thursday. Sophia had been fussy since late afternoon, a tooth working through, and by 11 the house was finally quiet. Ethan came down the hallway just before midnight. He hadn't been sleeping anyway, and stopped outside the guest room. The door was half open. The lamp on the dresser threw a narrow yellow band across the floor. Emma had just laid Sophia down. She was leaning over the crib, smoothing the floral blanket with both hands. She thought she was alone. He watched her fold the top edge inward twice, pressing it flat, then tuck the left corner underneath, snug against the mattress, and leave the right corner slightly loose, angled away from the baby's mouth. One side firm, one side open, he stood still. He had seen that fold before, in a photograph. The paramedic intake photo emailed to him the night of the alley, taken before anyone had touched the box. The blanket had been folded exactly that way, same corner tucked under, same corner left loose, same angle. It was not a standard way to fold a baby's blanket. It was a personal one, developed through repetition, in the dark, by someone doing it alone. He went upstairs without saying anything. In the morning, he opened his laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up the intake photo. He looked at it for a while. Then he called Dana Ruiz and asked her to come before Emma arrived. Dana came. He showed her the photo. He described what he had seen the night before. She listened without interrupting, wrote 2 things in her notebook, and said she should be in the room for the conversation. When Emma got there at 8:30, Ethan asked Clara to take Sophia to the living room. Emma came into the kitchen, set her bag down by the door, and registered something in the way Ethan was sitting. Still, not standing to meet her, and stayed near the entrance. Dana was at the far end of the table. "Sit down," Ethan said. She sat, both hands flat on the table. She looked at him and waited. He asked her directly. "She's mine," Emma said. "Yes." He let her go on. She told it in pieces, pauses between them. She'd delivered Sophia alone in a county hospital with a nurse she didn't know, and no one else. She had thought about the emergency room. She had thought about the fire station, too. But Sophia was no newborn anymore, and every shelter rumor Emma had ever heard told her the same thing. If she walked in and admitted she could not keep her baby safe, she might lose Sophia before anyone listened long enough to understand why. After that, a motel, then 2 shelters, each with rules she couldn't keep, and rosters that moved people along before they had any footing. After Sophia was born, something in her stopped functioning reliably. Not her love for the baby, her ability to act from inside it. Hunger and fear, and something she would later learn had a clinical name, wore her down until every day became arithmetic. What she could hold, what was already slipping. She had done everything she knew to do. The night she left Sophia in the alley, she had watched that loading dock for 2 nights first. She wrapped her daughter in the best things she owned. She waited in the shadow of a doorway across the street until a man came and stopped and crouched down. She watched him call 911. She watched him take off his coat. She watched him stay until she could hear sirens. She followed him to the hospital, she said, not to take Sophia back. A man who stayed until nearly dawn in a hospital waiting room was a man who might not let her daughter disappear into a system that had already lost track of both of them. Dana was writing. Ethan's hands were around his coffee cup and hadn't moved. He told Emma she had to leave. His voice stayed level. She picked up her jacket from the chair back and walked out. The front door closed behind her. Not hard, barely a sound, and that near silence was what Ethan sat with for the next several minutes. He had expected something from her at the door, some pressure, some argument, some request. She had given him none of it. She had stood, picked up her jacket, and gone. The absence of any of that, her specific, quiet dignity on the way out of a house she'd just been expelled from, was harder to process than anger would have been, and he knew it, and he didn't know what to do with the knowing. In the guest room, Sophia was crying. Clara had tried and stepped into the hallway. Ethan went in alone. He stood beside the crib and listened to the thin, unhappy sound of a baby who wanted something no one in that room could give her. After a while, he reached down and picked up the floral blanket from the crib rail. He stood with it in both hands. The fabric was soft from washing, the edges faded. He turned it over slowly. He did not fold it. He was still standing there when Sophia finally cried herself out. The County Family Resource Center was on a side street off Detroit Avenue, wedged between a laundromat and a used furniture store. Dana had chosen it deliberately. Not a courtroom, not Ethan's house. The waiting room had scuffed linoleum, plastic chairs in a color that had once been green, a coffee tin of crayon stubs on the reception desk, hand sanitizer beside a rack of parenting pamphlets. Everything in the room was worn to the same quiet level. Ethan arrived first. He sat with his coat across his lap and Sophia in the car seat beside his chair. He had not brought an attorney. He had considered it. Emma came in a few minutes later. She was thinner than she'd been the day she walked out of his kitchen. In the 10 days since, she had enrolled in a maternal mental health intake program and kept every appointment Dana had required. Her clothes were clean and chosen with intention. She carried a plain canvas diaper bag, no branding, packed efficiently, and signed in at the front desk without hurrying. She looked at the car seat before she looked at Ethan. Dana walked them into a small family room. 2 chairs, a low table, a playmat, a wall of windows onto a bare concrete courtyard. She told Emma she could lift Sophia. Emma set the bag down and crouched first, bringing herself level with the car seat before her hands moved anywhere near the baby. She unclipped the harness carefully. Then she lifted Sophia to her shoulder and stood. Sophia didn't light up with instant recognition. She was 4 months old and didn't have the wiring for it. But her body, which had been faintly braced, the way infants sometimes go rigid in unfamiliar arms, released. Her legs stopped cycling. She turned her face in against Emma's neck. Ethan watched it happen and shifted his gaze to the courtyard window. Emma checked Sophia's temperature with the back of her hand, moved her weight to the left. Sophia settled easier on that side when alert and got on with it. Nothing performed. No moment asking anyone to notice. Dana asked her to go through the notebook. Emma reached into the bag one-handed and set a composition book on the table. Black and white cover, worn soft at the corners. She opened it toward Dana. She had started it before Sophia was born. Prenatal notes. Questions for appointments she hadn't always been able to make. After the birth, feeding amounts in columns, how long before the latch broke down, rash reactions dated and described, sleep patterns on hand-drawn grids. The song she'd found that worked when Sophia was overstimulated, and 3 days later a note that it had started working. The foot-rubbing habit dated, the ear-pulling before fevers. The difference between the cry that meant overtired and the one that meant pain. Written out plainly, the way someone writes things down when there is no one else to tell. Dana turned pages without rushing. Ethan looked at the notebook and understood something he hadn't been able to reach from the factual version of events. This was not the record of a woman who had stopped caring. It was the record of a woman who had been paying close attention under conditions where that had cost more than most people had left to spend. Emma said the hospital bracelet in the plastic sleeve had not been an accident. She had read once, in a pamphlet at a shelter resource table months before Sophia was born, that infants found without identification could get delayed in the system, records hard to match, placements held up. She kept the bracelet folded in the blanket, sealed in the only plastic sleeve she had, because paper could tear and ink could bleed, and a baby without proof could become a baby without a past. She wanted whoever found Sophia to know her name, her birth date, the fact that she had a traceable existence. She wasn't erasing her daughter. She was doing the one thing she had left to make sure her daughter couldn't be erased. Ethan looked at the bracelet Dana had placed on the table. The same small band from the blanket, its plastic sleeve bent at the corners from being carried too long by a mother who had nothing else official to offer. The night of the alley, a nurse had read the name aloud at intake, Sophia Clark. He had noted it and kept moving. He understood now what it had taken to leave it there. He told Dana he was willing to cooperate with a structured reunification pathway, provided Emma kept meeting every requirement. Emma lifted her eyes from the notebook and looked straight at him. Sophie deserves a future built on the truth, she said, not on whichever one of us happened to have the nicer house. He had no answer that would hold up, and she knew it, and that fact sat between them without either of them needing to say so. He had spent the past weeks thinking primarily about what he could secure. What Emma had just put in front of him, the notebook, the bracelet, the plainness of that sentence, was a question about what Sophia would someday need to know. His money didn't reach that. Dana set her pen down. I want to be straight with both of you. She looked at Ethan, then Emma. What Emma has done is real. The county's timeline doesn't run on real. It runs on thresholds and review dates. There is a licensed foster placement available outside Cleveland. If neither of you meets the requirements by end of this week, the case advances." She paused. "Sophia goes with it." Emma's hand came up and rested against the back of Sophia's head. Just a moment. Then she lowered it and smoothed the collar of Sophia's onesie instead, fingers working a wrinkle that didn't need working because her hands needed something to do. Ethan nodded at Dana and said he understood. He was already thinking through the week ahead, and for the first time in a long time, he was running up against a problem that would not get smaller the more resources he threw at it. Dana came to the house Tuesday morning and got straight to it. Ethan's emergency placement authorization had a hard ceiling. Without a formal guardianship petition filed and approved, the arrangement would lapse before the end of the month. A licensed foster family in Medina, experienced with infants, fully certified, had a confirmed opening. If neither adult could meet the county's threshold by the review date, the case would advance. "Sophia goes to Medina," Ethan said. "Yes." He asked about a formal challenge, what it would require, how long. Dana set her folder on the kitchen table. "Before you make any calls, I need to say something plainly." He waited. "If you bring in private counsel and push placement on the basis of resources, the county will be required to categorize Emma as a contested claimant. Once that language is in the record, visitation can be restricted indefinitely during review for Sophia's stability and safety." She held his gaze. "You can probably keep Sophia in this house, but doing it that way means Emma loses access while everything gets sorted out. Months, possibly longer. There's no version where you win that fight and Sophia comes out ahead." He'd built a career on finding what controlled a problem and applying the right pressure at the right point. What Dana was describing was a situation where his best practiced move acted as accelerant. He sat with that for a moment. Then he told her he understood and didn't make the calls. Emma's path was slower and harder to control from every direction. Admission to the mother-infant transitional program required documentation from her mental health counselor, a current shelter reference, a completed parenting assessment, and a face-to-face interview at an office on the east side. 2 appointment slots were available. Neither aligned with the bus schedule. Emma was staying at a transitional shelter 2 miles from the county office. Her belongings fit into 2 donated moving cartons stacked upright beside her cot, sitting parallel to the wall in the careful way of someone who has had to move quickly before. Ethan offered logistical help with some care. A car for appointments, documentation support when she hit bureaucratic walls he could navigate quietly. Emma took the car twice. He declined it the 3rd time and took the bus. He didn't bring it up. She noticed without saying anything. The trust between them wasn't warm, it was functional. Given how they'd started, that counted. The week delivered the ordinary failures no amount of effort fully prevents. A form came back rejected because a supervisor's signature appeared on the wrong line, not the wrong date, the wrong line, which required a callback, a correction, and a resubmission that burned most of a day. Emma missed a parenting observation window when a bus ran late in the rain. The appointment had taken 4 days to schedule. A routine pediatric visit for Sophia ran longer than billed. Dana was present and took notes. Ethan's Thursday board meeting started without him fully in the room. He left 20 minutes early and Harlan caught him in the corridor. "You've been somewhere else for a while?" Harlan said. Careful, not accusing. "I know. I'm working on it." Harlan nodded and let him by. That same night, Clara sent him to a CVS 3 miles out for the specific diaper rash cream Sophia tolerated, not the closer store, which stocked the wrong formulation. He drove out at 10:15 and found it on the 3rd shelf. The checkout line had a man feeding scratch-off tickets into his wallet, and a woman ahead of Ethan counting out exact change with the deliberate patience of someone on a fixed budget. He stood under the fluorescent lights and waited without moving toward impatience. He wasn't sure when that had stopped costing him something. 2 days earlier, Clara had said something while folding a burp cloth, eyes on the work. Doing the decent thing usually looks inconvenient from the middle. He hadn't answered. She hadn't needed him to. By Friday evening, Emma had cleared 4 of the 6 admission requirements. That left them with less than 40 hours before the Sunday review. Not enough time to rebuild a life, but just enough time for the county to decide whether Emma was still building one. The 5th was scheduled for Monday. The sixth, a bed, wasn't confirmed, but Dana believed one would open by midweek. The county review was Sunday morning. Saturday night, Ethan was checking the back door before bed when he found Emma on the step outside. She'd come to drop off a signed form Dana needed before morning. She handed it over. She should have left. She stayed a moment. She stood with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking out at the dark yard. Then she said what she'd been carrying all week without setting down. "I'm not most afraid of losing her to the system," she said. "I'm afraid she'll grow up safer with you, happier with you." She looked at him. "And I'm afraid that might actually be true." She went through the gate before he had anything to say to that. He stayed on the back step for a while. The yard was dark and the air had turned sharp. Inside, Sophia was asleep. The review was in the morning. He stood there until the cold got specific, then went back in and locked up. She hadn't gone far the night before, just far enough. A bus stop 2 blocks over, the cold, a shelter cot with her shoes already on at 7 in the morning when Ethan called. "Come back before we go," he said. "There's something I haven't told you." She found him at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. Sophia was still asleep. Clara was somewhere in the back of the house. The kitchen was in that particular early morning state where everything is still, and the refrigerator is the loudest thing in the room. Ethan was looking at the table when Emma sat down, the posture of someone starting something they've been carrying for a long time. He was not raised badly. That was the part that made it hard to name. His mother had been unstable in the way some people are, not cruel, just unable to sustain. She made promises and then relocated. He had lived in 3 different households before he was 18, always the child who figured out the unspoken rules quickly, because that was how you became someone worth keeping. He stayed until he didn't. Nobody ever said he was unwanted. Nobody ever had to. He had learned over time to be easy to keep, quiet when quiet was required, competent when competence bought him security. He built eventually a life so controlled and self-contained that the question of anyone leaving became largely academic, because he had made sure very few people were ever close enough to matter. He turned the coffee cup slowly on the table. Sophia couldn't leave. She couldn't choose to. "I think I've been arranging things for a long time so that question couldn't come up. And she's the first thing in years where that just wasn't something I could engineer." Emma took a breath before she answered. Then she told him the thing she hadn't said in the intake sessions. The love had been real from the beginning. She wanted that on the table first. But after Sophia was born, there were days when the love was genuine, and her ability to act from inside it was simply not there. Not absent the way feelings go absent, gone the way a fuse goes, completely without warning. She'd stand in the shelter bathroom with the water running and take 10 full minutes just to work herself up to going back out into the room with her own daughter. She had understood in those weeks that collapsing on top of Sophia was worse than finding her somewhere she could survive. That had been the math of it, terrible, specific, clear. "I didn't stop loving her," Emma said. "I got afraid I was going to hurt her just by staying." Ethan set his cup down, pulled his coat off the back of the chair, and said they should go. The county review room was smaller than the resource center, a plain conference table, 6 chairs, a window facing a parking structure. A wall clock ticked above the door. Dana was already seated with 2 caseworkers when they came in. Ethan and Emma took chairs on the same side of the table. Neither of them had planned it that way. Dana opened the floor. Ethan went first, no notes, no attorney. He said he had initially understood what Emma Clark did as abandonment. He understood it differently now, as a decision made at the edge of what she could bear, by a woman who had tried to place her daughter somewhere survivable when she'd stopped trusting herself to provide that. Emma had entered treatment without being pressured. She had met every requirement the system put in front of her. She had chosen accountability at every point where something easier was available. If Sophia's long-term well-being required Emma in her life, and he believed it did, he was on record as supporting that. One caseworker wrote something down. Dana watched Ethan until he finished, then turned to Emma. She explained that Ethan's resources meant he could petition for formal guardianship faster than Emma could rebuild toward full reunification. Emma had the right to contest that. What were her intentions? Emma looked at the table, just a moment, just long enough to cost her something, then at Dana. Sophia should stay where she was most stable while Emma kept doing the work. She said it without hedging. Sophia's continuity came before Emma's timeline. If she pushed too hard and something came apart, that would be the last thing she'd given her daughter. She was not willing for that to be the last thing. The board approved an interim plan. No one smiled when Dana said it. Interim did not mean healed. It meant the door stayed open, the child stayed safe, and every adult in the room would have to keep proving what love looked like after the meeting ended. Ethan would petition for expanded temporary guardianship. Emma would be admitted to the mother-infant transitional program with daily supervised access starting immediately. Overnight visits to be reviewed in 60 days if progress held, not everything, real. That evening, Clara found the floral blanket at the back of the crib and carried it to the kitchen sink. She washed it by hand, laid it flat on the counter to dry, and when it was ready, she threaded a needle with pale thread and mended a small tear along one edge, 4 stitches, no more than the repair needed. She folded it once, set it aside for Emma's new room, and went on with the evening. When the review ended, Dana brought Sophia in from the side room where a staff member had watched her during the meeting. She laid her on a folded blanket at the center of the table, the careful way you set down something that matters. Sophia looked up at the light. Then she raised both arms at once, turning her head toward neither one side of the table nor the other, toward both. Ethan and Emma reached for her at the same time. Winter let go in increments. A degree warmer, an hour more of light, the gray on the windows thinner some mornings than others. By the time March turned reliable, Ethan's house had changed in ways no one had planned and no one had particularly resisted. A formula stain on his good wool sweater he'd stopped trying to remove. A stroller in the mudroom corner, with the settled look of furniture that belonged there. 3 board books beside quarterly reports on the side table. A high chair at the kitchen table where a lamp used to stand. The lamp had migrated to a shelf, the way space rearranges itself when a house begins organizing around different needs. Emma did not walk into any of this on a single good morning. She walked in across weeks. She finished her treatment program in late winter and started front desk hours at a neighborhood pediatric clinic. Practical, unglamorous work that kept her inside the world of infant care and gave her a schedule and a reason to be somewhere by 8 o'clock. Some days she drove home from that shift clear and steady. Some days she sat in the clinic parking lot a few minutes before she could make herself move. The shame didn't leave on a predictable schedule. She had learned, at least, to stop being ambushed by it. Ethan's healing was no cleaner. He still reached for work when the emotional temperature in the house climbed past what he knew how to manage. He still occasionally proposed a logistical fix, a different specialist, a better program, when what the situation actually needed was for him to sit down and stop solving. Emma learned to say so briefly, without making an event of it. He learned to hear it without going cold. Neither habit came easily or arrived all at once. In February, Emma had stood outside a parenting class at a community center on the west side and couldn't make herself go in. She texted him the address. He drove over. They went in together and sat in the back row among parents who were younger, older, more certain, and more rattled than either of them, which turned out to be the most useful quality of the room. They got coffee from the hall machine afterward and drove back separately. That was how several things between them got handled. Practically, without a ceremony it didn't need. Clara stayed the bridge through all of it, not by talking about what was happening, but by doing what she'd always done. She kept people fed, handed things off, said the one necessary sentence before leaving the room. Dana came less often as the months passed. On her final visit, she stayed 45 minutes, wrote almost nothing in her notebook, and on the way out, looked at the stroller and the board books and the high chair. She said it looked good. She meant it, and they both knew she did. The legal arrangement settled into something honest. It was not adoption, and it was not a clean return to the way things should have been. It was a careful, court-approved middle ground. Sophia stayed in the home where she had become steady, while Emma kept earning back more of the motherhood she had never stopped wanting. Ethan filed for structured guardianship, a form that protected Sophia's stability while keeping Emma's path toward expanded maternal rights open and on record. The language reflected the actual situation rather than forcing it into a standard category. That was the most truthful thing about it. In late spring, while Clara put Sophia to bed, Emma sat at Ethan's kitchen table and helped map out the intake protocol for the foundation. He had converted an old commercial property into something practical. Postpartum referrals, emergency infant supplies, transportation help for appointments the system required but didn't assist anyone in reaching, short-term navigation from staff who'd been through the process from the inside. Emma drew from memory and from specific failures she knew firsthand: the form rejected for a signature on the wrong line, the shelter beds unavailable, the long gap between a crisis and any real help. She worked without sentiment. Then the rain, the kitchen, April. Clara at the stove making soup from memory. Ethan near the counter with Sophia on one arm, bouncing her in the absent rhythm of someone who'd learned it without noticing, his phone in his other hand, one thumb working an email while Sophia pulled at his collar. Emma at the island slicing bananas, steam on the windows, rain against the glass in the irregular way it comes when there's no wind. Sophia found the spoon on her tray. She brought it down on the high chair once, then again, then a third time, each strike more committed, more certain of her audience. Emma laughed, the quick kind, out before she'd decided to let it. Ethan looked up from his phone, already smiling. Clara stirred the pot without looking up. Nobody gave a speech about what had been built in that room. The evidence was in the details. Cabinet light above the stove, rain on the glass, a child banging a spoon and looking around to see who noticed. A house that had stopped being organized around one man's careful distance from anything that could need him. On the morning the center opened, Ethan stood near the back while volunteers unpacked supplies from flattened moving boxes, diapers, formula, folded blankets stacked on tables along the wall. A small sign near the front desk read the Rose Blanket Center. Emma had chosen the name, and Ethan had not argued. Some things did not need to be explained to be understood. He watched Emma at the front entrance as a young woman came through the door carrying an infant carrier with the careful, exhausted look of someone who'd taken 3 buses to get there and wasn't sure she'd found the right place. Emma said, "Come in." She said, "You don't have to explain everything right now. Just sit down first." The young woman sat. Ethan stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched Emma pour a cup of coffee for a frightened stranger, and understood, plainly, that Sophia had not just changed one house. She had changed the direction of several lives. And somewhere in the back room, folded on a shelf between new blankets and donated ones, the old Blorberger blanket rested with 4 careful stitches along one edge. No longer proof of the worst night in Emma's life, but evidence that even torn things could be held, mended, and given back with love. And just like that, Ethan and Emma's story comes to rest. Quick note: this is a fictional story, written to move you, not a documentary. But everything you felt watching it, that part's real. So I gotta ask, what hit you? The alley? Emma's impossible choice? Or that kitchen scene at the end where nobody gave a speech, they just showed up? Tell me in the comments. I actually read them. Here's what I'm walking away with: the person who needed rescuing most was also the one brave enough to stay. That's not just a story, that's something worth holding on to. If this one landed for you, hit like, share it with somebody who needs a good story today, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. More stories just like this are waiting on your end screen. Go find the next one that speaks to you. And hey, thank you, really, for watching, for feeling it, for being here with us. Take care of yourself out there. We'll see you in the next story. And trust me, it's a good one.